Welcome to this deep dive. Today we're tackling success. It feels like something we all understand, but, well, the story we usually tell ourselves, be smart, work hard, you'll make out, it might be missing some really big pieces.
Exactly. That standard narrative is powerful, but our source today suggests it's incomplete. To really get at what makes someone an outlier, someone whose achievements are way outside the norm, we need to look beyond just the individual.
Right. And our source is Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers. We're diving into the introduction in the first few chapters, our mission, to pull out those key insights, the surprising stuff about what really shapes success, looking around people, not just at them.
And Gladwell starts us off in a place that seems, well, completely unrelated at first, a small town in Pennsylvania.
Ah, Roseto. Yeah, I love this story.
Mm.
So this town, Roseto, Pennsylvania, founded by immigrants from this one village in Italy, Roseto Valfratore. And in the 50s, this doctor, Stuart Wolfe, he noticed something odd.
Really odd. He was spending summers nearby, and a local doctor mentioned almost casually, I hardly ever see anyone from Roseto under 65 with heart disease.
Which was crazy back then, right? Heart attacks were a huge killer, especially for men that age.
Absolutely. So Wolf was intrigued. He digs into it, pulls death certificates, medical records, family histories.
And what did the actual data show?
It was stunning. Basically, nobody under 55 in Roseto died of a heart attack. For men over 65, the rate was half the U.S. average, and the overall death rate 35% lower than expected.
Wow.
And almost no suicide, alcoholism, drug addiction, crime was super low, no one on welfare, no ulcers. The sociologist John Brune, who worked with Wolf, basically said these people were dying of old age. That's it.
Just old age in the 1950s. So, okay, they must have looked for the obvious reasons. The diet.
Yeah.
That famous Mediterranean diet.
That was the first guess. But nope, they weren't eating like they did in the old world. They'd switched to the American way. Lots of meat. Cooking with lard, not olive oil. 41% of calories from fat. They smoked, had obesity issues. It definitely wasn't the diet.
Okay, so not diet. Genetics. Something specific to people from that Italian village.
Check that too. Wolf found relatives living elsewhere in the U.S. They had normal American heart disease rates. So, not genetics.
And not the location itself, because nearby towns, similar immigrant groups had heart attack rates 3 times higher for older men.
Yeah.
So, if it's not diet, not genes, not location, what's left?
This is the kicker. The secret was Roseto itself, the community.
The town. How?
Brune and Wolf just observed people were always visiting each other, chatting on the streets, cooking together. They had these incredibly tight-knit extended families, 3 generations often under one roof, huge respect for elders. The church was central. 22 civic organizations in a town of under 2,000 people. And this really strong egalitarian ethos. You didn't flaunt your wealth. If someone was struggling, the community quietly helped out, sort of obscured failures. They basically rebuilt their Italian village structure.
So they created this social bubble almost that protected them from the stresses of the modern world.
Exactly. A powerful, protective social structure. It literally buffered them against the things that were contributing to heart disease elsewhere.
And the medical community back then didn't quite get it right. They were focused on cholesterol and individual habits.
Right. They didn't really have a category for community as a health factor. Which brings us right back to the main point for this deep dive.
That you can't understand success just by looking at the individual. You have to look at their world, their culture, their community, the context.
Precisely. And that idea of context, specifically opportunity, is where Chapter 1 takes us, starting with Canadian hockey.
Yeah, this is a great example. Because we think of elite sports as the ultimate meritocracy, talent rises, right?
That's the theory. But this psychologist, Roger Barnsley, he was just looking at rosters for elite junior teams and noticed something weird about the birthdays.
Weird how?
He said, for some reason, there were an incredible number of January, February, and March birth dates.
Incredible,
How many?
Like in one league, nearly 5.5 times more players born in January than November. For the really elite teams, it broke down like 40% born Janmar, 30% April-June, 20% July-Sep, and only 10% Octocat.
10%. That's a huge skew.
Yeah.
Barnsley said he'd never seen an effect that big.
Yeah, the source even shows a roster, the Medicine Hat Tigers. 17 out of 25 players born January through April.
And there's that play-by-play example using birth months instead of names.
Right. March 11 passes to January 4, shoots. January 22 deflects it. Goal by March 6th. It really drives it home.
So what's the explanation? It sounds mystical, but the source says it's simple.
Super simple and totally arbitrary. The eligibility cutoff date for age class hockey in Canada is January 1st. Ah, okay. So if you're selecting kids at, say, age 9 or 10.
Exactly. A kid born January 2nd is almost a full year older than a kid born December 30th, but they're in the same age group. And at that age, 12 months is a massive difference in physical size and coordination.
So the coaches, when they're picking kids for the special rep teams, the elite squads, they're not necessarily seeing more talent, they're seeing more physical maturity.
Pretty much. They mistake maturity for ability. And then the advantage starts building. It's what sociologist Robert Merton called the Matthew effect.
From the Bible verse, right? To those who have, more will be given.
Exactly. The slightly older, bigger kids get picked. What happens then? They get better coaching, they play with better teammates, and crucially, they get way, way more ice time.
More practice.
Tons more. Like 50 to 75 games a season instead of maybe 20. Practice 2 or 3 times as often. So that initial small advantage of being born earlier
turns into a huge advantage in skill development because they just get vastly more opportunity to improve.
Right. By the time they're 13 or 14, they are actually better players because they've had all that extra experience. The system created the difference.
And it's not just hockey. The source mentions other sports.
Yeah, U.S. baseball has a July 31st cutoff, so you see more August birthdays in the majors. European soccer shows similar patterns based on their cutoffs, like September 1st in England, leading to more September to November players.
And this spills over into education, too.
Definitely. There was a study looking at international test scores for 4th graders. The oldest kids in the class, those born earliest relative to the school cutoff date, scored significantly higher, like 4 to 12 percentile points higher on math and science tests.
Same reason. Teachers mistake maturity for ability.
Seems like it. So the older kids are more likely to get streamed into gifted programs or advanced tracks.
Which means better teaching, more resources.
And that advantage accumulates. It persists. The source points out that in U.S. colleges, the youngest group in a grade cohort is underrepresented by something like 11%. That arbitrary birth date disadvantage can actually affect your chances of getting into college.
Wow. It makes you think how much potential we might be losing because of these cutoffs. Denmark, the source says, waits until age 10 to group kids by ability, when those maturity differences aren't so stark.
It really highlights how we focus on the individual, did they work hard enough, and ignore the structure of the system itself, these arbitrary rules that create winners and losers based on luck, like your birth month.
So the system matters, opportunity matters, which challenges that idea that pure talent is the whole story.
And that brings us to the next big idea, right? Preparation.
Yes, and the famous 10,000-hour rule. This originated with studies by Anders Ericsson, looking at violinists at a top music academy in Berlin.
He wanted to know what separated the absolute best from the just, really good. Exactly. He split them into groups. The potential stars, the sort of good players, and those likely to become music teachers. He asked them all to estimate how much they'd practiced throughout their entire lives.
And what did he find? Did the stars just practice more?
Well, they all started around the same age, about 5, and initially they practiced similar amounts, maybe 2 or 3 hours a week, but then around age 8, things changed.
How so?
The kids who would become the stars started practicing way more, and they kept increasing it. By age 20, the elite group had logged, on average, 10,000 hours of practice.
10,000 hours. And the other groups?
The good group, about 8,000 hours. The future teachers, only 4,000. He found the same thing comparing amateur pianists around 2,000 hours versus professional pianists 10,000 hours by age 20.
And Ericsson's big takeaway was, there were no naturals. No one just coasted to the top on talent alone. And no grinds who practiced like crazy but didn't have the talent.
Not at that elite level. His conclusion, as the source puts it, is that once you're good enough to get into a top program, what separates the very best from everyone else is simply how hard they work, or rather, how much they work. The stars practice vastly more.
So it leads to this idea, this magic number of 10,000 hours. Neurologist Daniel Levitin is quoted saying this number keeps popping up for achieving true world-class expertise in complex fields.
Right, whether it's composers, basketball players, novelists, chess players, it takes around that much focused, dedicated practice. He says they haven't really found cases of top-level expertise achieved with significantly less.
Even people we think of as born geniuses, like Mozart.
Well, Mozart started composing incredibly young, age 6, but his first works considered true masterpieces didn't come until he was 21. 1997. That's after more than 10 years of intense composing. A music critic even called him a late developer for his time.
Huh. And chess grandmasters.
Usually takes about 10 years of serious study and play to reach that level. Again, roughly in that 10,000-hour ballpark, except maybe Bobby Fischer, who supposedly did it in 9.
So the point is, practice doesn't just happen because you're good. Practice is what makes you good. But, okay, 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
That's like a full-time job for 5 years, or maybe 4 hours every single day for 10 years. How does a young person even get the chance to do that?
And that is the crucial connection the source makes. Hitting 10,000 hours isn't just about grit. It requires opportunity, often extraordinary opportunity.
Okay, like who? The source gives examples, right? Bill Joy.
Bill Joy, yeah. Co-founder of Sun Microsystems, clearly brilliant math prodiger, but his path to expertise was paved with some amazing luck. He got into the University of Michigan in 1971.
And Michigan had something special.
It was one of the very first universities with a time-sharing computer system. This was revolutionary. Before that, it was punch cards slow, tedious. Time-sharing was interactive, fast, like growing from chess by mail to speed chess, as the source says.
So, access to cutting-edge tech. But lots of students had that access.
True, but Michigan's computer center was open 24 hours a day. And crucially, there was a glitch in the system. A simple command let you bypass the billing mechanism. You could get unlimited free computer time.
Unlimited and free.
Yep. So Joy, who just fell in love with programming, could spend 8-10 hours a day coding. Later at Berkeley, he practically lived in the computer lab. He got his 10,000 hours in way earlier than almost anyone else could have.
So brilliance met this incredible accidental opportunity for massive practice.
Exactly. Now think about the Beatles.
Okay, pure musical genius, right? Changed the world.
Undeniable talent. But when they broke through in America in '64, they had already been playing together for 7 years, and they had their own usual intense practice opportunity.
Which was?
Hamburg, Germany. Between 1960 and 1962, they played gigs in the strip clubs there.
Strip clubs.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah, these clubs wanted non-stop music to keep patrons there. The Beatles had to play for hours and hours every night. John Lennon said, "We had to play for 8 hours, so we really had to find a new way of playing." Pete Best, their drummer then, said it was almost non-stop, 7 nights a week sometimes.
8 hours a night. That's insane stage time.
It really is. Over several trips, they racked up something like 270 nights of performing in just over a year and a half. By the time they conquered America, they'd performed live an estimated 1,200 times. Way more than most bands ever do.
So Hamburg was like their crucible, forcing them to play constantly, experiment, get incredibly tight as a band.
Biographer Philip Norman said they were no good on stage when they went there. They were very good when they came back. It was the opportunity that let them hone their talent through sheer volume of practice.
Okay, so Joy had the computer lab, Beatles had Hamburg.
Yeah.
Then there's Bill Gates.
And his story is maybe the most striking example of a chain of opportunities. We know the basic story: smart kid, Harvard dropout, Microsoft. But the source lists this incredible sequence of lucky breaks that allowed him access to computers and programming time, starting way back in high school.
Right. Wealthy family, elite, Lakeside school. That was lucky break number 1. Lakeside somehow had a sophisticated computer terminal in 1968. Super rare.
Then, break number 2. The school's computer budget ran out, but the Mothers Club raised money for more time. Break 3. A parents' company needed weekend software testing, free computer time for Gates and his friends. Break 4. Another company, ISI, needed help and basically gave them unlimited time for months. Gates logged over 1,500 hours there in just 7 months.
It just keeps going.
Break 5. He lived near the University of Washington and figured out he could sneak in and use their computers for free in the middle of the night, like 3 to 6 a.m.
He called it stealing time.
And break 6. A company called TRW needed programmers with very specific experience. ISI recommended the Lakeside Kids, and Gates got to work on a major project for school credit. It was one thing after another.
An unbelievable sequence. So by the time he left Harvard, he wasn't just a smart kid with an idea. He was a veteran programmer with well over 10,000 hours.
He basically admits it himself, saying how incredibly lucky that series of events was, giving him more exposure to software development at a young age than almost anyone else.
So talent and drive are essential, clearly. But these stories show that reaching that 10,000-hour mark often depends on being in the right place, at the right time, with the right, often unusual opportunities.
And sometimes that right time is about historical shifts. The source points out something fascinating about the richest people in history.
Oh yeah, what's that?
Of the 75 wealthiest people ever, 14 were Americans born in a single 9-year span in the mid-1800s. People like Rockefeller, Carnegie.
Why that specific window?
They came of age just as the U.S. economy was undergoing a massive transformation, railroads being built, Wall Street emerging, industry exploding. They were perfectly positioned, age-wise, to ride that wave. Born a bit earlier or later, they might have missed it.
That makes sense. And it connects to the tech pioneers too, right? Like the birth of the personal computer.
Exactly. January 1975, the Altair 8800 computer kit is featured on the cover of Popular Electronics. That's often seen as the starting gun for the PC revolution. Who was perfectly positioned to jump on that?
Someone young enough to see the potential, but old enough to have the skills.
Yeah,
Maybe early 20s.
precisely. Born around 1954, 1955. And who fits that? Bill Gates, born October 55. Paul Allen, January 53. Steve Ballmer, March 56. Steve Jobs, February 55. Eric Schmidt, April 55. Bill Joy, November 54. The other Sun co-founders, all 54 or 55.
Wow, that's not a coincidence. It really underlines that timing and historical context play a massive role.
It's about being ready when the opportunity created by history arrives.
Okay, so community. Accumulated advantage from arbitrary rules, massive practice, enabled by extraordinary opportunity. It really paints a different picture of success. Which leads to the next big question the source tackles. What about just being incredibly smart? Is being a genius enough?
Yeah, this chapter introduces Christopher Langan. You might have heard of him, often called the smartest man in America. IQ reportedly around 195, maybe higher. And the source details his just astonishing cognitive abilities from childhood.
Like speaking at 6 months, reading at 3, teaching himself advanced subjects, questioning the existence of God at age 5?
Exactly. Acing tests without studying, reading incredibly dense texts like Principia Mathematica as a teen, just off-the-charts intelligence.
The source also mentions an earlier case study by Lita Hollingworth about a child called Elle with an IQ near 200, showing similar incredible intellectual power at a young age.
So these are undeniable examples of raw genius. Then the source brings in Louis Terman, the Stanford psychologist behind the Stanford Binet IQ test.
Right, Terman studied those high IQ kids, his termites, for their whole lives, starting back in the 1920s.
And Terman fundamentally believed that IQ was basically everything. He's quoted saying something like, "There is nothing about an individual as important as his IQ, except possibly his morals." He thought his high IQ termites were destined to be the leaders, the elite.
And that basic idea still shapes a lot of things today, doesn't it? Gifted programs in schools, using the SAT for college, those brain teaser interview questions tech companies used to ask.
Absolutely. There's this underlying assumption that the higher the cognitive ability, the higher the potential for success. That IQ is the main ingredient. The source even briefly mentions IQ tests like the Raven's progressive matrices, designed to measure abstract reasoning ability.
But given everything else we've just talked about, opportunity, practice, context, the source starts to question that assumption, right?
Yeah.
Is a super high IQ really sufficient on its own?
That's the central question here. Determine, by focusing so intensely on just IQ, miss other crucial factors. Factors that explain why some geniuses flourish and become outliers, while others maybe don't reach that same level of worldly success.
And the fact that this chapter is called The Trouble with Geniuses, Part 1, kind of gives away that IQ alone isn't going to be the whole answer. There must be something else.
It strongly suggests that, yeah. That there are other ingredients needed, even for the most intellectually gifted, to translate that potential into the kind of outlier success Gladwell is exploring. Factors Terman overlooked.
Okay, this is fascinating. Let's try to wrap up the key takeaways from this first dive. We saw with Roseo that community and social structure can have profound effects, creating advantages that have nothing to do with individual biology.
Then the Matthew effect showed how systems themselves, through things like arbitrary cutoff dates, create unequal opportunities that accumulate over time, giving some people a huge head start in developing skills, whether in hockey or academics.
And the 10,000-hour rule highlighted the immense importance of practice for mastery. But crucially, that achieving those hours usually requires extraordinary, often lucky opportunities, like the ones Bill Joy, the Beals, and Bill Gates stumbled into, often at just the right historical moment.
Yeah, the consistent theme is that you really can't understand extraordinary success without looking outside the individual at their culture, their generation, the opportunities presented to them, the rules of the systems they operate in.
So it leaves you with a pretty provocative thought, doesn't it? If success hinges so much on these external factors, these lucky breaks, these opportunities that are clearly not distributed evenly, are we doing a good job of finding and nurturing talent?
Right. Or are our systems in education, in sports, maybe everywhere, actually filtering out huge amounts of potential because we don't provide equitable chances for everyone to get that crucial experience, those 10,000 hours?
What if we really thought about redesigning things to give more people a fair shot at accumulating those advantages?
It definitely shifts the conversation from just praising individual merit to critically examining the fairness and effectiveness of the structures that shape our lives and chances. A really powerful idea to chew on.
Thanks for listening. Visit our library and subscribe below for more book summaries. This has been a Sprint Reads production.